Hello, everyone. It's the Conscious Culinary podcast, and I am your wellness chef, Tracy Clark. Thank you for joining. What are we talking about today? Well, if you caught the last episode, we had some guests on from the I Eat, I Vote campaign, and we got another one. We're going to keep talking about their message. It's a great message. It's a group of farmers who put together this campaign to educate people about some of the issues that face farmers so that as a consumer, we can better understand where our food is coming from. And when it comes to voting for local politicians all the way up, we're more informed about the people that are going to correlate with what we think is right. So we kind of need to know what the issues are, right? So today joining me is Pam Lewison. Good morning, Pam.
Good morning.
She is from the JP Ranch. They're out there in Grant County by Moses Lake. She's a fourth generation farmer. I think that's really cool. They have about 360 acres and they're farming about 100 of them right now. They do a lot of hay and corn. And you have to remind me of the word. What are those goods?
They're forages.
Forages. Okay. Yes. I'm learning so much. Well, welcome, Pam. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. And you?
I'm doing very good. I can't complain, although I sometimes do. So the I Eat, I Vote campaign, how did you come to hook up with these people?
So I am also a Washington State Farm Bureau member. And so Rosella Mosby and Sarah Howard, and Kimmy Devaney as well, who've all sort of spearheaded the campaign, invited me in because along with being a farmer, I spent almost a decade as a journalist. So I have a lot of insight into things like ad placement and how better to communicate with people. And so they asked me if I would help sort of craft some of the messaging and help with some of the ad placement and that sort of thing.
Yes, it sounds like you're the perfect person because right now you're the policy analyst for the Washington Policy Center.
That's correct.
So you really have the inside scoop on what's happening. And it sounds like, very prepared to move them along. So what has the I Eat, I Vote campaign been doing over these past few months that is going really well? How have they been able to share their message? And what do you think is really working?
So what I love is that we've quickly adapted to social media channels, which is a huge part, I think, of any communications push. We've also placed print ads in some of the magazines, particularly in the King Pierce County area, because what we're really hoping to do is target a very specific audience that maybe doesn't have a lot of personal experience with farms. So I think we've done that really well, and we have continued to grow that audience over the last several months. And I think it's a good campaign to not talk about candidates or local elections, but rather talk about why food and policy around food is important, not just for farmers, but for everyone.
Right. Well, as we were talking last night, let's get into some of these issues that you think that people aren't really aware of. What are some of your top issues that you feel need to be communicated to the consumer?
So I think there's a few. I'd like to start actually with the labor discussion because we have a very symbiotic relationship as farmers with our employees. We need them and they need us. And so there's a few different pushes that will have an impact on farm families, but also on their employees' families as well. One of them looks at wage rates, and everyone talks about, how everyone should get paid more. The problem for ag families in particular with a large number of employees is that wage rates don't necessarily correlate with our cost of production expenses. So what often happens is farmers choose to pay their employees while choosing not to pay themselves. And there's lots of discussion that centers around what that pay should look like and how farmers are part of that discussion. But often, I think they sort of lose sight of the fact that farmers are essentially wholesale manufacturers. The difference is that we don't get to pick the price at which we sell our product.
Wow.
So
We need to point that out again. We just need to say that again. Like farmers are not able to choose the price of their food.
mm-hmm.
That's really tough. So it's kind of up to us as policymakers and voters and the policymakers to make sure that they have the responsibility to know what the price of food should be so that you guys are supported. That's a big
Right.
point. I think we just need to highlight there.
Yes. And I think, it's interesting to me because people see the cost of things like bread and milk and even flour going up in the grocery store. That does not correlate to an on-farm increase in income. And oftentimes that increase goes to the grocery store itself, to transporters, to marketers, to other people. So
who are also paying their employees more.
Right. Who are also have employees. But, that supply chain is quite long to go from your farm to the plate of a consumer. And everyone in there gets their cut. But farmers don't get to set their asking price. They have to look at what the commodity market is for that day and decide if that price is enough to compel them to sell what they have. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And sometimes, whether you like it or not, you just have to liquidate what you have in that silo because you have bills to pay, and you just have to make do with what you get from your sale.
Right, because what's the alternative? If you say, well, that's not enough, you just hold on to your food, or what is your option if you don't want to sell it at that price?
I mean, if you don't want to sell it at that price, your option is to sit on it, and then if you're in if you don't have your own silo or your own storage facility, you're paying for storage of your product for longer, and in the meantime, there's no money coming in.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult cycle for farmers. And I think what gets lost in that discussion is that at the end of the day, farmers value and care about their workers very much. And because without them, farms are not successful.
How many employees do you guys have at the JP Ranch?
So our farm is super small. And we, for us, my husband and my dad do most of the farm work. In the crush of the summer months, I pitch in and help as well. My job is, my off-farm job is kindly flexible to me and allows me to go out and help. So we don't have any employees personally. But what that means also is even with our small farm, we very rarely pay ourselves.
Right.
Every bit of income that we may generate gets rolled directly back into our farm pursuit.
Wow.
Which is why I work off farm.
Yeah, exactly. And that's And I know when Rosella was on and Sarah last time, they were saying, there's not a lot of pull for the younger generations to go into an industry that doesn't seem very lucrative and it doesn't seem like the community is supporting them. Mm-hmm. And you say, that farmers have a good relationship with their employees. So have you spoken to any farm employees who feel the same way? Like, where is this message coming from? Because as an outsider, I would hear somebody say, oh, we need to pay, these workers on these farms, like way more. They deserve minimum wage or whatever it is they're asking for. Just that alone, I think, of course, we all, it's expensive to live in Washington. What do you think the opinion is of the actual farmer employees?
So I was fortunate enough to talk with some apple pickers this summer, especially as we, talking about all sorts of different things. But they often have the same concerns, which is, if the cost of labor becomes too expensive, am I still going to be employed? Because my employer has to balance, not just the cost of labor, which in some cases is up to 50% of your operating costs. You also have to factor in that they still have, property taxes to pay. They still have other inputs that go along with running a business. And so I think there's a pervasive concern among many ag laborers about, they're sensitive to that income and whether or not their income will continue based on that that wage pressure. And I do think, it's important to note, in Washington State, most farms are quite generous with their salaries. I can't, not all, but the average hourly wage rate for a dairy worker in Washington State is nearly $18 an hour. And most pickers in Washington for fruit harvest are making, anywhere from $18 to $22 an hour. So it's it's not, very few farms are bringing in employees and saying, we're going to only pay you minimum wage.
Wow.
They are trying to make sure that they're paying their workers a fair wage for what they're doing.
Okay. Let's go to another issue. What do you think is another one that is a little, the communication just gets a little mumbled when it gets to the consumer?
So I think, the other one that is always interesting to me is food security and how we talk about where your food comes from. And we talked about it a little bit yesterday. When you walk into a grocery store in the last 9 months, you see a lot of bare shelves. And I think it's important for consumers to realize that we live in an incredibly bountiful state. Washington State offers more than 300 food items through the 36,000 farms that are housed in our state. So while your grocery store may not have what you're after, there are other resources that can maybe get you what you need. And I think as we move forward, we need to maybe have more of a discussion about how to make sure that we are accessing the bounty that's around us.
Yes.
I think it's important to try to figure out how to connect more with your food. WSU and the Beef Commission and a few other commodity groups are really great about maintaining lists of where you can go for direct sale or direct buy of whatever item you're looking for, whether it's a CSA box in the summer for your fruits and veggies, or looking to line up a meat purchase from a rancher or a livestock producer. So I think I would like to see more discussion and more policy centered around supporting the idea that you can access local food and that it is, healthful and nutritious and abundant.
I love that. I'm a huge proponent of trying to buy local, because not only are you going to be eating in season and the food's going to have a much shorter journey to you, but you're supporting your neighbor. You're keeping that money in your state and supporting each other. And you can also, like you said, if you want to go to a rancher, my husband and I have been talking about doing this for the longest time, is just going in with another family and getting a cow, and then we get half and they get half. Because for me, my body does a lot better without meat. But I'm not a vegetarian. I definitely eat meat from time to time, but I want to make sure that I know where this cow is coming from, and I want to know the farm. And when we can do that and we look more local, the ability to do that is so easy. And I know this is my question though. So as a mom, when grocery shopping and stuff, even just to try to go by the Patterson's farm in Gig Harbor and just I would try to go there and get everything that they had that I needed. And then I would get the rest at the grocery store, at the big grocery store. But then you bring kids involved. And I'm like, I'm not getting out twice. There's no grocery cart to put them in at Patterson's farm. And so I stopped doing that because of the hardship of just having children and the logistics of it. So are you saying some of these programs maybe could help like deliver some of the products? Because that's my thing. Is like, how am I supposed to get all that food? Go to this farm and then go to this farm and then go to this farm. Like I can't even go to 2 stops on my way home.
Well, so I think every farm has a different way that they approach that. I have, I know some cattle feeders who have started direct selling their beef, and their approach is they'll bring it to you if you ask them. There's a cost involved in that, but they will still be mindful that it's that they're providing you with frozen beef, and so it's easier for them to put it in a refrigerator truck and bring it to you versus trying to ship it or asking you to come to them.
Right.
So it's really about getting to know your producer and asking if there are workarounds. So I think that there's an opportunity to build a relationship where, maybe all you have to do is swing by and pick up that box of produce because it's ready for you.
Right.
Or
which is easy. That's easy.
Right. You leave the kids in the car, let the car be running,
Yep.
throw the box in the back and get on your way.
Yeah.
So I think there's certainly ways to do that. I would also, as also a mom, I think there's also room with some of particularly you pick farms where, take your kids out, let them run around and see, see where their food comes from and see what it looks like, not from the grocery store. Because things like, Brussels sprouts are a great example. They don't grow like little cabbages. They grow on a stalk. And so, if you don't ever see that, you don't think about the personal connection that you should have with the person who grew that, but also with the food itself and, where it comes from and how it thrives.
Yes. I'm all about, especially teaching children like where meat comes from,
Mm-hmm.
so that they truly understand just, what's going on. Maybe I'm trying to create a bunch of little vegetarians, but I don't know why, but not that I am one, but I love that. I think that is great. And you did mention there's places where people can go to get more information about their local farm. What was that again? Let's just say it one more time.
So WSU, through their Connors department, which is the College of Animal and Human Health, they have a website that will allow you to filter out. So you can say, I just want to find, berries within a 25-mile radius of this place. And they will neck it down for you and say, these are all the places where you can go to buy this item.
Wow, that's amazing. What's that website?
So I'll have to find the link for you, but if you go to WSU's Connors department, you can find it there. And it's just a shop local sort of push. And the Beef Commission does something similar. So what they have through their website is a list of producers who do direct sales of their prepared beef, but also they have a listing for all of the local places that you can go to have an animal butchered. So both of those are great resources, particularly for somebody who's interested in really trying to buy hyper local. I will put an asterisk on our butcher shops. With the advent of COVID, people started booking out their appointments with butcher houses very early on. So if you are looking to buy a live animal and have it harvested, I would caution you to make an appointment with the butcher first, because it may not be until next year that there's an appointment available.
That's really good information. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. So let's move on. Do we have a third issue we can unpack here?
Sure. I think the one that's been pressing for the last 13 days is that the Washington State Supreme Court recently overturned a portion of our Constitution that exempted all ag workers from being paid overtime pay. And they overturned only that constitutional statute specifically for dairy workers. And this has some larger implications for all ag workers. There's the potential that this is something that we'll see ag-wide. For now, it's the dairy industry that's being saddled with the burden of trying to figure out how to rework their schedules to ensure that they're still able to pay their employees a fair wage, but also stay afloat. And that goes back a little bit to the discussion we had earlier. The difference is that most commodities kind of make a wave pattern. So they kind of go up and down in terms of their price. Milk, on the other hand, because there's been competition from non-dairy sources and things like that, they have actually been in a serious downturn for the last 5 years. So what that means is that dairymen have been losing money for the last 5 years, but they are still trying to figure out a way to maintain their herd and keep their employees. And so when looking at that, and now this additional cost of overtime pay, some of our local dairies are going to go out of business because of this, because they're not going to be able to figure out a way to continue to lose money and continue to keep all of their employees.
And what do you think is it just the policy? You said it's on a downturn for a while now. So is it just the competition from other?
I think it's a number of factors. 2020 was actually supposed to be an uptick in milk prices. And that's what had been projected until, the entire United States closed their schools and all of their restaurants for a while. Mm-hmm. And that caused a pretty significant nosedive. So there's, I think there's some other larger things that play into that. Input costs are more, and everything continues to go up in cost when you start looking at how you're going to healthfully and kindly care for your cattle. And so you have to offset that with, now what do we do about this new additional input? Back of the napkin figures, for a medium-sized dairy, it's going to cost about $1.5 million if the court orders them to pay back pay to their employees. I don't know, I don't really know of any farm that can suddenly fork over $1.5 million.
No, I mean, I think it's pretty rare for anybody in any industry.
Right. It's a huge amount of money. And if they have to do that, many of those farms are going to have to liquidate their cattle to do so, or at least try to. So there's a lot of pervasive concern about that. And it's not that, again, farmers are interested in trying to shortchange their employees. Right. It's that up until now, they've been following the letter of the law. They've been following the Constitution, which says you're exempt from paying overtime. It's a straight wage, no matter how many hours you work. And so anything that asks them to pay back payment is essentially punishing people for following the law.
Oh, yes. So this back pay, I didn't realize that was part of it. I thought it was just moving forward. And so now, yes. Like I think we mentioned last night, some people are going, well, now do I get paid less so I can work the same amount of hours, but not get.
Right.
Yeah.
So the best advice that people have been, that dairy owners have been given is to set each of your employees down and say, I'm going to have to pay you a little bit less. So that when you get into those overtime hours, you're actually going to end up with a little bit more. Mm. But it's a hard discussion to have. Thanksgiving is next week. Mm. We're just a shade out of, a month from Christmas, and having to look employees that you may have had on your farm for a very, very long time in the eye and say, I'm going to have to scale back your pay so that we can all survive is a really hard discussion to have. And it's not one that anybody wants to have.
And I can imagine on a farm, overtime comes because when the food is ready, the food is ready. So there is no I'll do this tomorrow, I'll schedule this out. It's like when the work needs to be done, it has to be done right then. And it's for everyone's benefit.
Yes.
And so the grocery stores have the food that they can sell, that the people have it they can buy. So I can see that trickle down effect.
Yeah. And it was mentioned to a group of us yesterday in discussion. And I think it's an excellent point. Produce and livestock don't have a calendar and they don't have a time clock. So on a dairy, cows have to be milked when they have to be milked for their comfort and for their health. So you can't not milk them. And it's the same with produce. If an apple's ready, you have to pull it off the tree, or you have wasted all of your inputs to create that apple. So it becomes really important to be mindful that a lot of ag work is cyclical. So this time of year, thankfully, we're starting to ramp down a little bit because most everything is going dormant or being harvested. But, come the first thaw in the spring, you put your foot on the floor and just farm.
Oh, I bet. And would you say that when it comes to the dairy farms, it would also be very helpful for them to try and do that direct link to try and get products directly from them?
So some dairies are set up to do that already. Not very many, because there is a caveat in Washington state law that prohibits the purchase of raw milk.
Right. Oh,
So
prohibits.
yes. So
Okay.
so dairies technically cannot sell raw milk in this state. It
Mm.
has to be pasteurized.
See, because I know in Florida you can get it, but it says not for consumption. It's like
So
their loophole. Like you can buy it,
yes,
but they're telling you you can't eat it,
you
but
have to
you
do
can.
something else with it.
And everybody kind of agrees that they're buying
Mm.
something that is not, you know,
Mm.
particularly regulated, or, who knows,
Mhm.
like kind of being a bit going rogue there with their
Yeah.
raw milk.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm like, I would love to go straight to a dairy farmer
Mhm.
and feel good about the dairy farm and know that I'm getting nice products, because it's the pasteurization sometimes that I think is hard on people's systems.
And
Um,
I think what I would urge is anyone who's interested in trying to really support dairy farmers in particular, are in Washington state, we have a local co-op, and that's Dairy Gold. So if you're buying a Dairy Gold product, you are buying it from a Washington dairyman. So
that's nice to know, because I look at these big labels and I
mhm.
think, how can they produce all this milk? They have to go to all the little farms.
Yes. And so um, dairy is interesting because most milk that you see in a store, or butter even, or cheese, is sourced from a dairy. So and in a co-op manner. So you have all of this milk going into a co-op, and then that co-op in turn markets the product. So it's definitely important. If you're interested in trying to support local dairymen, Dairy Gold Products is a great way to do it. You can also, it seems sort of silly, but you can also contact the Washington Dairy Federation and donate directly to them, because what they do is in turn represent dairymen and their members in sort of that larger policy discussion. And I think both of those are really good ways to be supporting a dairy producer. And there are, again, there are some dairies where you can go and purchase butter and pasteurized milk and cheese. But you're going to have to hunt it a little bit more than you would some other products.
Right. But just knowing that it's all understanding that something like the name Dairy Gold is going to be your local dairy farmers.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it's coming from. So that's really nice to know.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for somebody listening to this, this is the first time that they've heard these kind of issues. What would be your biggest takeaway for them?
I think that what's really important is whatever your preference is, whether you want to eat organic, conventional, somewhere in between. The thing to remember is that all farmers are interested in providing healthy, nutritious food. And so there's no farmer that is interested in hurting a consumer, because ultimately it sort of breaks that cycle where they're not able to do what they do best and what they love.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for anybody who's not familiar with agriculture, or isn't particularly interested in maybe meeting a food producer, you can look at people like me, or people like Rosella and Sarah, and they are people who are producing your food. And we all have the same concerns that you have. We want to make sure that our kids are eating good stuff, even if they don't like it. We want to make sure that, that we're being good stewards of the land and of water and other natural resources. And because our livelihood depends on those things. And so it's important to us all to farm in a holistic way, that ultimately benefits not just us, but also consumers as well.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea and that perspective. And yeah, it puts a face to the food. And
Mm-hmm.
we are so disconnected, it's hard for us to really understand just where the food is coming from. So I love your guys' campaign and I really like your message. I think it's really important. Anything else that you can throw out there, any tidbits or places that you'd like to send somebody, like a website or?
So I would for sure check the WSU website if buying local is what you're interested in, and the same with the Beef Commission. Also, Washington Farm Bureau is a great resource for learning more about just ag in our state, because they feature growers of all sorts, and they also offer some good perspective. And so my favorite thing that Farm Bureau does, in fact, is that during the legislative session, if you suddenly decide you really want to support us on a policy level, they go through and parse out all of the bills that come in that are specifically going to affect ag positively or negatively. And you can see what the bill is about and who the sponsors of the bill are. And if it's something that you think is erroneous in some way, you can in turn reach out to those sponsors and say, hey, I'm just a regular consumer, but this doesn't seem like something that's going to be beneficial for my food producers. And I think if we can all start to take more ownership of that, we'll all be better off.
I love that. That's a beautiful message. Well, we've used up all our time, so we have to be done. But thank you very much, Pam, for coming on and sharing your point of view and sharing your vast knowledge on the inner workings of why things are the way they are. I definitely learned a lot this episode, and I think a lot of people will as well. So thank you for being here. And
Thank you.
have a lovely day to everybody else. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back next time with more fun food topics.